Hello everybody and welcome to this my video on the One Shot 35 half reusable film camera. This comes from the class of cameras that are called reusable because it separates them from single use, even though there are very many features like the lens optics that they share in common. This is a 35mm half frame point and shoot camera, meaning that your 36 frame roll of film will get at least 72 images on this because each frame is half the width of a normal 35mm frame. It has no light meter, a guillotine style shutter, meaning that the shutter is closed and when you take a picture it opens and then closes again like that. It has a single shutter speed of approximately 1/120th of a second. The flash sync on this camera syncs at that same shutter speed. And this is basically a half-frame version of the Agfa Photo Reusable Double Film Show Vibe 501F, the generic Corex-made, Corex reusable camera, sometimes called with other names, the Ilford Sprite 2, and a number of other cameras. But this version, unlike all of those that I named, is an actual half-frame camera. So it is the target market for this camera was is, because it's a brand new camera, the toy or fun user. It is completely plastic, well, except for the shutter springs and some wiring inside of it. It's mostly plastic. And as I said, this appears to be one of many identical cameras, and it appears also to have been made by the Corex company, or corporation, because it has all of the same molding as those, even though it doesn't specifically say that anywhere that I found on the packaging or on the camera. This camera technology and some of the pieces that are molded into it go back to the early 80s. There's nothing revolutionary in terms of technology in these. So this was likely made by Corex. It was definitely made in China, according to the box, and insofar as I could tell, this is a brand new version of this camera for 2023. So, as we do, let's go over the features on the camera and see what everything is. And we're going to start right here on the top. This is your film rewind knob and lever, and basically when you're done with a roll of film, you're going to rewind it with this. This is your flash ready light, and what you're going to do is when you use the flash, you're going to turn it on, and when the flash is charged up, this is the first time I've charged it up, so this will take a couple seconds, this light will turn red to indicate that the flash is ready to fire. There it goes, finally turning red. Shutter button, frame count window right there. On the camera's front, we have the make and model, focus-free lens, meaning you don't have to focus it, optics, 50mm f5.6, we'll get to that in a second, viewfinder window, flash button. I am skeptical of this. This is a single meniscus lens in here, which is the Corex style of lens, and in order to be a 50mm lens, this would have to have a 50mm film plane to the rear of the lens distance. This camera is only 44mm deep at its deepest point right here, and that lens is set way back in there. This is the exact same construction as the versions of these lenses which use the 31, 32mm. They're called different focal lengths depending on the actual camera. So I suspect that what they're saying there with 50mm is that the field of view that this camera provides is 50mm. The lens focal length is not actually 50mm, which is actually kind of too bad. I'm not going to lie, because I think a 50mm half-frame lens like this would be like a fun challenge. On the camera's back, viewfinder window, film advance, film door. Now you might notice if you're familiar with the other Corex cameras that has this is the same viewfinder window as on the full frame versions. This is masked here lightly to give you a half-frame-ish sort of field of view. I haven't used this camera yet, so I can't say for certain how accurate that's going to be, that framing. On the camera's bottom, we have the battery chamber. I'll switch this around so you can see it as you would. Battery chamber, film rewind button. On this side, we have the film back release. We'll see that in a second. And on this side, we have the camera strap handle. To open the camera's back, we simply push this button down, and now we are inside of the camera. Film cassette chamber, film shutter and image capture area. This is the shutter rearming sprocket, film take-up spool, and these pressure ridges right here help keep the film properly aligned on the focal plane as it moves through the camera. And as you can see, the focal plane here is curved, which is a technique used to help minimize light loss and also to keep the film in plane with the field curvature created by the simple meniscus lenses used in these cameras. So first thing we're going to do, even though the only thing that this does is power the flash, is we're going to install the battery. So if you need to change the battery, you just open up the battery chamber here, reach in, pull out the old dead battery. Now on the battery chamber, you'll see there's a plus sign down on this side and a negative sign down here, and that is also replicated inside the battery chamber, though it might be a bit hard to see in this video. We're going to grab our replacement battery, push the negative side in, slide the positive in, and now we've changed the battery. With a battery to power our flash and make us ready for any photographic setting, we can now load film. To load film, we're going to open up the back of the camera, lift the film rewind knob like that. We're going to take a roll of 35mm film. We're going to drop it into the camera and push the film rewind post back in place. We're going to pull the film leader out, and oh, I don't like the way that looks. If you can see here, this is kind of bulging, and when that happens, you've just got to push the film forward so that it clicks back into place. And advance, there we go. We're good to go. Film's being taken up on the spool. And close the film back. Now you're going to look in the frame count window here. That's pretty close to 1. It's going to be 4 or 5 frames to advance to get to number 1. I just did 5, and that's looking like it's on number 1 now. So there we go. You advance the film to frame number 1, and we're there. You will know you've loaded the frame correctly if after you take a photo, the shutter arms, because that sprocket that is inside the back of the camera, which we'll see again in a second, arms the shutter as the film advances. If the film isn't advancing, the shutter can't be armed. So pretty foolproof. You will also notice as we take photos here that the film rewind knob advances as the film moves. And this is what allows us to rewind the film later. The film is connected to this knob through the cassette and to the take-up spool over here. So an important thing about film is that it's one and done. So it can record light a single time to create an image with a proper shutter speed and aperture for your lighting, or in an uncontrolled manner like this, which would erase all of the images that could or have been taken outside of the cassette. But I want you to see how film moves in the camera. So when you trigger the shutter, you're going to advance the film. I'm going to keep my finger here so that it engages the sprocket holes. And the sprockets turn the sprocket holes engage that sprocket, and it turns as the film moves through the camera so that the shutter will rearm as it moves. And then you can see that the film only moves the width of that half frame area, which is right about here on the film. And that looks like that's pretty darn close to overlapping, but that's all right. So at any rate, there is it's only moving half the width of a normal frame. Okay, so you've gone through your day, you've used up your entire roll of film, and it's time to rewind it. Keep your film back closed, push the film rewind button down. I believe you have to hold it on these models as well. And then you start rewinding the film. I'm keeping my finger here because the film back isn't closed. Normally the film back being closed would do that for me. When you finish rewinding the film, I'm going to leave a little bit of a leader out, but when you finish rewinding the film, you rewind it all the way into the cassette, and now at that point, it's okay to open up your film back again because the film will be inside the cassette. And one thing that you want to do is rewind your film all the way into the cassette, because that's a good reminder not to reuse the film accidentally and get double exposures by taking more photos over the film you've already used. When you've taken out your film, all you have to do is either grab your next roll of film and reload it as we just saw, or if you're done shooting for the day, trigger the shutter and close the camera back, and you're done. Next thing we're going to talk about is using the flash. We've put a battery in, so we're going to actually use the flash. I want you to take a look. You might not be able to see it in the video because of how dark it is down in here. I'll see if we can get a little light that might help. But when you turn the flash on, you get a different aperture. Okay, so when you have the flash on, it's intended for inside use, so you get a slightly larger aperture. Smaller outside, larger inside. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so one of the nice things about that is if you don't have a battery in your camera, you can use this flash on-off for a little bit of aperture and lighting control outside. So if you want to have a little bit more light reaching your film, a bit more softness, quite honestly, then what you want to do is have no battery and leave the flash setting to on. Okay. Then when you go to take a photo, what's going to happen is that the flash is right up here. So you're going to take a photo and the flash will trigger. That's very bright. Holy cow. And you'll have flash illuminating your images. It's that simple. On, off. An easy way to remember this is that on, the button is touching the side of this slider where the flash is on that side of the camera. So now that we've put all this together, we've got film in the camera, we know how to use it, we've got a battery in the camera, we know how to use the flash. How do we take a photo with the camera? Now, this won't shock you if you watch this video. You push the shutter button. So you push the shutter button, advance the film until the shutter rearms, push the shutter button, advance the film. That's how you keep going to take photos on your entire roll with this camera. All right, so we take a photo. What about a double exposure? Well, you can't with these cameras because the shutter requires that sprocket to turn and the film to move in order for the shutter to be rearmed. Double exposure prevention is completely built into this camera, so you can't do an intentional double exposure. There is a thing you can do. When you load your film, what you want to do is grab a marker and put a line right here where your film exits your cassette chamber. Shoot your entire roll of film, rewind it and leave yourself just a little bit of leader. Then when you reload it, line up that same exact point here and then start taking photos again, and your two frames should overlap pretty closely, if not exactly, across the entire roll. And that way you can take double exposures on an entire roll with this camera. I do have some tips for using your One Shot 35 half to get the most out of this camera. The number one tip is going to be use 400 ISO film or faster. 400 ISO will give you suitable negative density outdoors. Now I know that this says it's f5.6. I'm sure that cannot possibly be right. Let's assume it's f11, f9 to f11, which is what most of these are in that range. The acrylic glass on these does not transmit quite as much light as optical glass, especially coated optical glass. So these create a very dim image. So basically what you're going to want to do is try your darndest to throw fast film in here and just deal with the digitization or printing artifacts that come with very thick film. So 400 ISO film for outdoors, 16 to 3200 ISO film for indoors. This is, by the way, a very light and easy to carry camera. Has a nice little handle on it, wrist strap. And so the best thing you can do with this is carry it around. But do be mindful when you're carrying it that if you hit this too hard, some of these with this back design have a tendency for the back to pop open, and that can be a problem for your film, because the back popping open will ruin some of your film. And other than that, just enjoy it. Like, these aren't made to be passed down to your kids and grandkids, so enjoy them for as long as they work for you and take the images you get from them. They're not going to provide technically perfect images. They're not designed to, they're not supposed to, and they won't do that. But they can create images which have a captivating atmosphere and mood to them, and that's what you should aim for when you're using a camera like this. So some things not to do with your camera. Don't store it with the shutter ready to fire. Always trigger your shutter at the end of the day just to take the tension off of the springs that are in there so that they don't fatigue and wear out. Yeah, you might waste a half of a frame, but that's cheaper than having to buy a new camera if the springs or something breaks in the mechanism. Don't leave your camera or lenses in, don't leave your camera rather in the car, because extreme heat, like in the summer, or extreme cold, like in the winter, can significantly damage the plastic in these cameras, and that can ruin your camera as well. And don't let this get wet. It's not weather sealed, and the handful of metal components in here could be ruined by getting wet. So even though these are not in the sense that we talk about on this channel, precision tools, you should still handle them with care and respect, because as long as you take care of your one-shot 35 half, your one-shot 35 half will take care of you. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you in the next camera manual video.